What's up, YouTube? So I want to talk about various ways of switching up and modulating LFO shapes in real time. So I had a question come in from one of my Patreons whether it's possible to change LFO shapes in Vital in real time. And actually, it's not without several steps of setup, but it was a feature in some of the older synths, I'm sure you guys can remember, where, you know, when LFO shapes were still pretty basic and you could just switch between them almost like basic shapes. So I want to show you guys why I end up usually doing this thing in Phase Plant and exactly what it is we're trying to do. Then I also want to show you how to set this kind of thing up in Vital, because, I mean, that was the question from the Patreon, and various different techniques to actually set it up, ranging from the most simplest to one that's a little bit more advanced, but once you wrap your head around it, it's actually pretty cool. Anyway, let's dive in and have a look. So the main idea behind the sound, so just bear in mind this is not really a musical example, this is barely just to show you exactly what it is that I'm talking about. So the idea of the sound is to be able to switch between different wave shapes that's modulating something in real time. So one example of something like this would be where you have multiple kind of basic shapes. So for those who are wondering, I actually just dragged this in from my Serum folder, which has the basic shapes, and it just converts it into the Phase Plant wavetable. And then we can switch up the wave shapes like this. The reason I did it this way as opposed to just using a default is because in Phase Plant, the default wavetable morphs. Maybe you want that, maybe you want a more kind of switch-like motion. We will discuss the differences of both of these. So listen to the sound as I trigger a note here. This is basically just on the pitch. It's pretty basic, but the idea is to be able to change the shapes of that modulation. Okay, so the reason I do this in Phase Plant is just because it's much easier to set up. Reason being is that Phase Plant has the LFO table, which is essentially just a wave table as an LFO. So it gives us the ability to morph this in real time. If you do have Bitwig, you can actually do it using Bitwig's built-in wavetable LFO as well, where you have the basic shapes over here, but you can drop in the Serum wavetable and just use that over here. So if you don't have Phase Plant, you can use the Bitwig modulator for that. Okay, cool. So that is the idea of the sound, and I want to show you how to get a very similar approach in Vital. So the most basic way of setting something like this up would be to just use FM. Do you know what I mean? So like here, for example, let's pop the basic shapes in over here. And then all we need to do is set up FM from oscillator 2. We can turn the volume down of this one because we don't want to hear it. We just want to use it as a modulator. So now what I want to do is I want to turn this note track off in the advanced options so that this note information is just free. It's not grabbing information from the actual keyboard input. But another trick is what we can do is we can actually set the entire Vital patch down by -48, and then we can tune this oscillator up a couple of octaves by 48. So then what happens is we're actually just reducing the entire frequency of the synth, but the main carrier oscillator is going to stay the same. And then this basically just increases the pitch range or frequency range that we have in the LFO. And then furthermore, what we can do is we can actually shift this up. We can actually just trigger a lower note on the keyboard, and that'll give us more frequency range. Okay, so the issue with this, though, is we can't modulate anything other than just the pitch or the amplitude, for example, if we set it to RM, which is amplitude modulation or ring mod. So what if we want to apply that same kind of movement, random but still programmed kind of movement, to something like a filter or any other frequency or any other parameter in the synth? We would have to set up some kind of weird way of switching between these LFOs. So one way of doing it would be to create, I've actually discussed this in a previous video, is to create a switch that switches between all of these LFOs using the amplitude modulator. So here, let's say, for example, I'm just going to name this modulator, and I want to apply all of these LFOs to this, right? And then this one, let's call switch, right? So here, let's go in and apply this into the middle of each of these LFOs. And now what we want to do is we want to go into the mod matrix, and here for each of these which say modulation amount, we want to set these all the way up, right? And then here we want to draw a system which is like on the first quarter, we go like this. Wait, this one will be the last one, right? Because it's the LFO 4. So here we would go in the first quarter, we would go up. Here we would go up in the second quarter. And here we would go up in the third quarter. So now, if we switch this, do you see how it switches these modulators on like this, using the switch system? In fact, at the bottom, you'll notice here this first node is down. We actually want to set this up so that it starts. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. We're getting there. So now, anything that we assign this modulator to, we would be able to send this switch of LFO data to. So here, for example, if we set the modulator to the filter, okay, I'm just going to set all these frequencies back to normal. And so also what I want to do is I want to jump into each of these LFOs, and I want to set them all to seconds. And then we can create one time modulator for all of them. So bear in mind you have 8 LFOs. You can do this for all 8, but I'm just going to do it with 4 just to keep it simple for now. So now we can actually modulate the time with all of them together. But here, let's go in and actually set these all to bipolar. So it's going up and down. So we can slow it down and speed it up. Cool. So now in each of these, we just want to jump in and choose a different shape. So let's say saw down. With this one, let's say sine. And with this one, let's say saw up. So we've got triangle, saw down, sine, saw up. And so now we can switch between all of these. You might want to go in and actually turn the smooth of all of these LFOs down, just so you get a little bit more of an accurate response. And so the reason I did it on the modulator is because now we can apply it to multiple destinations, and the setup just remains the same. Okay, so that's setup number 1. I want to show you setup number 2, which is actually a little bit easier to set up and kind of expand on the idea, but it's a little bit confusing at first. Okay, we want to set it to tempo and then freeze. So now this LFO is not actually going to move until we actually modulate this phase of this, right? So now step 1 is to determine how many shapes we want. So let's just go with like 4 shapes. And so the trick now is to actually draw in the shapes in each of these quadrants. So let's say, for example, we'll do the same that we had earlier, where we have the saw up, and then here let's do something weird, maybe not a sine, but something weird like this. And then in the last one, a saw down. And so the trick here is to modulate this in quarters repeatedly, and then switch this over to choose the different shapes. Okay, so firstly, let's just assign this to the pitch so we can hear what's going on. And now let's go to LFO 2 and let's set this into a saw up, like a ramp up. And then let's use this to modulate the phase of this, right? So now you see how it's actually moving this first LFO, and the speed is determined by the second LFO. So the trick here is to only modulate this by, let's choose the value of 0.25. Do you see that? So now it's going to loop just that one shape that we determined. And it's going to do it at this speed here. We also want to turn the smooth down on both of these. And so here what we can do is set this to seconds, and we can set up a macro to modulate that. We can call this speed. And now we can go to the matrix and we set this to bipolar. Okay, so we've got the looping envelope. Now what we need to do is we need to set this up to switch. And this is actually very simple. All we need to do is set up a macro that's going to modulate this phase again. And now let's call this switch. Now let's jump into the matrix. And now here all we need to do is set up a 4x4 grid, where on the first one we are down at the bottom, second one, third one, fourth one. And so when we switch like this, notice how it now switches to that phase on the LFO, and then it'll repeat from there. So the reason that I said this method is actually better, it's just a little bit confusing with the whole phase thing. The reason that this is better is because now we can actually just jump in and change these, you know, with a more kind of like, how can I say, granular approach. Let's say put in triangles like this. Let's actually go up to 32s. And then let's choose steps like this. And now go ramps. And we can choose all sorts of different shapes here to get some really weird modulation movements. Okay, let's do like a sine-like thing here at the end. Little bonus cherry on top. If we transpose this into a scale that we know, instant arpeggiator generator. Then if we just snap it to the fifths, so that's like the C and the G, we're just creating this kind of harmonic pad. So like reverb on that, instant random ambient textures. Ah, such a good little concept, this one. Yeah, well, that's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to be uploading all of these presets that I made today up to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link in the description. And yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.